Dave, what changed to get Iran willing to talk?
Well, this is the first movement we've seen on this issue since Joe Biden took office in the United States. This agreement was reached between Barack Obama, Iran, and those five world powers. But then Donald Trump famously took the U.S. out of the Iran deal. He had promised to do so in the campaign. He did so for a variety of reasons, one of which was pressure from Israel, which has been opposed to this deal from the beginning. But Joe Biden, during his presidential campaign, promised to take the U.S. back in. Yet since he took office in late January, we have not seen any movement from his administration to try to make that happen. So this is a significant development, but there's still a lot of roadblocks here. So why has Joe Biden not taken the U.S. back in yet as he promised? Well, the situation has become a lot more complicated because Donald Trump pulled the U.S. out of the deal. Because from the moment he pulled out, as far as Iran was concerned, the deal was no longer valid. It has continued to exist on paper between Iran and the other parties, but the reality is Iran has not complied since the U.S. pulled out, and it has not, most importantly, allowed inspectors into its facilities. So the Biden administration has been looking for assurances that Iran will begin complying again before they'll re-enter. So essentially, you've got Iran saying, we'll start complying again once the U.S. re-enters and stops its sanctions, and the U.S. saying, we will re-enter as soon as Iran begins its compliance, and neither side has wanted to move first. So this is a very positive sign. But who blinked first? We don't really know, because the really significant thing here is they have scheduled talks for Vienna next week, but direct talks between the United States and Iran will not happen. It's going to be this kind of weird format where Iran talks to the other agreement signatories and they pass on the message to the United States and vice versa. So how much can be accomplished in that format, we're not really sure. If that kind of arrangement sounds childish, it's because it is, but this has characterized Iran-U.S. relations for some time, that just talking to the other side is seen as a big concession. And I think both sides here want to maintain some plausible deniability that they ever actually agreed to resume talks. So they're happening in this tentative format first in Vienna, and then we'll see if they can move on beyond that.
And Dave, what are those discussions on Tuesday aiming to achieve?
Well, they'll be looking at two tracks here. One is to get the U.S. to end its sanctions and return to the deal, and the other is for Iran to start complying again, most notably allowing those inspectors in. What will be the key for success next week? How will we know if those talks were successful? Well, the most obvious indicator will be if the U.S. and Iran agree to hold direct talks in the future, or maybe in Vienna, during this Vienna meeting, they say, you know what, let's go ahead and start talking to each other right now. So maybe by the end of the day, we get news that that's happened. But Iran is saying that those direct talks between the U.S. and Iran don't have to be the indicator of success here. They're saying that they could start complying again with the deal without any direct U.S.-Iran talks, that all the U.S. would have to do is unilaterally say, we're rejoining the Iran deal and we're ending sanctions. And if the U.S. made that announcement, Iran would start complying again. But this is really delicate for the Biden administration, and it's hard to see how they would agree to do that without direct talks, because they need absolute assurances from Iran that they will indeed begin complying. Because if Biden takes the U.S. back into the Iran deal now, and in a few months it's shown that Iran, in fact, has not begun complying, it would be a political disaster for Biden at home. He would be absolutely torn apart for that, both by his political opponents domestically and by Israel. They want to avoid that situation, and for that, there's going to have to be some modicum of trust here between the two, and that will probably require direct talks. So if we still don't have direct talks by the end of next week, it's not a sign that everything's fallen apart, but time is ticking here. I mean, every day that goes by, Iran gets further and further away from what it agreed in the Iran deal. And here in Brussels, I'm hearing the time period is basically 2 months. If the U.S. hasn't rejoined the Iran deal in 2 months, it would be a very bad sign for the deal's survival. And so really, they're looking for some kind of result before the start of the summer, or else this deal could be history.
Thank you very much for that, Dave. Dave Keating reporting.